adults anyway.
Hey, I am an adult.
Hey,
I'm always watching everybody.
stand up. Let me see if you're an adult. You're not big enough to be an adult.
And you know the person that you're looking for would have enough comments to cover the rest of the hour anyway, so
Yeah.
we wouldn't get over it.
We would,
I think
yeah.
I'm taller than your wife, so
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. An inch or so.
yeah.
I got. I
Considers me an adult, right?
yeah. Look, I don't think that she's an adult either.
I was
So
about to
there.
say, half
Would
the
you
time
like
he
to see
doesn't
my
call me
ID,
an
sir?
Okay. We're going to finish up. Well, we're not going to quite finish up tonight, but we're going to try to get through the biggest part of the chapter 18 of Proverbs. So we concluded last week with verse 12. We're going to pick it up with verse 13. In Proverbs chapter. What happened to mine? Chapter. Oh, is it the fan? Sure, it's the fan. Okay, chapter 18. Okay, we'll just get started then. We'll read the verses. So our first selection tonight just going to be two verses 13 and 14. That's the set. Again, as a reminder, New Living Translation. So if you're reading in the King James, or in your case the original King James, yes.
I've been nice to you all evening.
It's okay.
I know. I figured I better get my shots in early because.
And last week I didn't say a word. One thing I was so tired of. I couldn't hardly-
I was going to say, you left early. That's the reason we had such an easy night. So,
You asked for it now.
verses 13 and 14. So, reading out of the New Living Translation, spouting off before listening to the facts is both shameful and foolish. Boy, do we have a lot of that going on today. Verse 14, the human spirit can endure a sick body, but who can bear a crushed spirit? Yes, sir.
I was wondering who spoke with Barbie today. About spouting off,
Oh, did she? Are you telling tales out of school?
I think I'm telling on myself.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, might need to reference last week about gossiping and telling stories and.
Like, did she go and tell someone that I've been spouting off?
So I mean, that's real easy for us to do, though, isn't it? I mean, we want to jump into a conversation before we know everything that's going on. Now, these two verses reach back, just in case you're thinking, man, this is familiar. They do reach back into what we just studied. Verse 13 kind of summarizes 17:27 through 18:4, which we just read last week. Verse 14 reminisces about 17:22. Excuse me. But they also, and more importantly, they set up the next several verses. Okay, so we're going to see these basically, these are the two themes for the next set of verses that we're going to read tonight. 15 through 19. So, but let's just take them standing alone for a minute and talk about just these two verses, right? These two verses carry some pretty solid advice to us, as Brother Travis was telling us. We always seem to get our tongue in gear before we get our brain engaged, right? And so the tongue's doing 90 miles an hour, and the brain is still in park, still idling and warming up. And when I read this in prep for tonight, I couldn't help but think of all of the talking heads that we have in the media today, and that seems to be the specialty, right? Oh, this just happened, and this, we've got, and it's not just the media, right? We've got mayors, we've got governors, we've got senators, We got representatives. We've had presidents who will pop off and start talking about something. Somebody was harassed by the police. Somebody did this. Somebody did that. And then when the whole truth comes out a little bit later on, it's like, oh, well, wait a minute. That's not quite what I thought it was when I opened my big mouth and started talking without any sense, right? And so here it is, right? This has been a human characteristic for centuries upon centuries. We like to try to show how smart we are. And we kind of read that last week too, right? Every person seems intelligent until he opens his mouth. Okay? So, I don't know what it is. I think there's something wrong with the gravity of the earth. Because I think the ground is getting further away from me. So, to what?
Just wait a while, it'll get even
further away, yeah. So we always seem to get our tongue in gear without really thinking, right? And we've had cultural proverbs about this. Think before you speak. Think before you act. Think. Please think, right? And we just don't see. We want to look smart. We want to feel important. So we're ready to opine in a heartbeat, and then we find out that it's not the situation we thought it was, and we look stupid. And as I prepared for this, I was recollecting back through my life, and some of my greatest and most embarrassing moments have been, when I've opened my mouth without knowing the whole story. Right? And we remember that we read here a chapter or so ago about perverting justice, convicting the innocent, releasing the guilty. And all of these things tend to happen when we start talking before we get all of the facts in. Verse 14 tells us a little bit about human nature. Just a few verses back in chapter 17, we read, a cheerful heart is good medicine. A broken spirit saps a person's strength. And that's verse 14 we just read. The human spirit can endure a sick body. Who can bear a crushed spirit? The Spirit is what really gives us the drive to live. Okay? And sometimes, we and I'm sure we all have come across people that have self-destructive tendencies. Okay, you may wonder or ask yourself, I knew this person, they committed suicide, or they did something just exceptionally stupid, like jumping out of an airplane with no parachute. In the news here not too recently, right, you had a pilot who just apologized. It was a hard landing. They had to do a go-around. He bounced the airplane. It turned out he damaged some gear, probably knew he'd done some damage. And they had to do a go-around. And while they were getting back into the pattern, he apologized to the captain. It was a small airplane. It wasn't like it was a jetliner. He apologized to the captain, walked into the back of the airplane, opened the door, and jumped out. They found him in somebody's backyard. It was in North Carolina, I think. Right. Why would you do something like that? People who knew him were like, this kid loved to fly. He was a young man, loved to fly. Why would he do something like that? The landing, and that's why I say that this verse gives us some insight. Why would anybody do that? And it's a broken spirit, right? A broken spirit who can bear a crushed spirit. We could be sick as long as our spirit is strong within us. We can endure that. But when we lose that spirit, and what is it that crushes the spirit? Okay? What this is not a rhetorical question. I'm opening this up for discussion. What is it that breaks the spirit? Do what? Failure. Don't. If you're wrong, don't be afraid to be wrong. Just speak out. No, failure. Okay, failure. But failure leads to something else that crushes the spirit. Hopelessness. Right? This young man that we talked about thought he had ruined the rest of his life. He lost hope. What are some of the other reasons, do you think?
Losing family.
Okay,
Yeah.
loss of love. Grief.
Yeah.
Loss of love. Okay, grief, loss of faith. When I was a young man, we were friends with a family, and I heard it on the news on the way home, and I thought, oh my, I know that guy. And his wife had left him, and he went up to the medical center and found the doctor that his wife had left him for, and shot and killed him, and then walked out in the hallway and shot and killed himself. And you would never have guessed it, that would have happened. But crushed spirits lead to these kind of behaviors. What crushes the spirit? Loss of love. Okay? We love him because he first loved us. We know what love is, or we should know what love is, because Jesus loved us first, right? But if you don't have that, or if you lose sight of that, then losing family members and you feel like you're all alone, right? Love. Loss of faith. If you had faith even as small as a mustard seed, you could say to the mulberry tree, may you be uprooted and be planted in the sea, and it would obey you. That's that mustard seed faith. Y'all ever seen a mustard seed?
Mm-hmm.
How many of y'all seen a sesame seed on a sesame seed bun like you get down to Jack in the Box or Burger King? Okay, mustard seed, I mean, that's a giant thing compared to a mustard seed. Right? And what Jesus, when Jesus was speaking there, he says, if we could take faith out of your body as a substance, and we had enough to fill up a mustard seed, which is about a third of what a sesame seed is. And that, I might be too generous with my comparison there. He said, you could say to this tree, I'm tired of you being here. Get up and go throw yourself into the sea. And that tree would jump up on its roots and go running down the road. People going down I-45 be having all kinds of accidents because this tree be headed down to Galveston. Get out of my way! Get out of my way! Waving its branches, losing its leaves. It'd be a pitiful sight. Okay? Loss of faith. Right? When things happen and we don't have Jesus to fall back on, to rely on, we lose sight of him, right? It's easy to become disillusioned. And then loss of hope. In Corinthians, we're taught that the greatest three things we have, right? Faith, love, and hope. And and I've listed these in order, right? Faith, love, and hope. When we lose love, it affects our faith. We can then transition very quickly into a loss of faith. Why? How many of y'all have ever felt like, why me? Right? Why me? Why me? Right? The reason we feel that way is because we have suffered a loss of faith. Right? We don't know if God is seeing us anymore. If God has remembered us, right? And then, of course, that leads to loss of hope. In Psalms 33, we put our hope in the Lord. He is our help and our shield. In him our hearts rejoice, for we trust in his holy name. Let your unfailing love surround us, Lord. Our hope is in you alone. Hope That's the last, it's a three-legged stool, if you will, right? And hope is always the last thing to go. We lose love, we lose faith, and when hope goes, it's easy to see that's how these people get there, right? But we have assurances in Scripture, and I've read some of them, right? We're always loved. Jesus will never leave us or forsake us. Our hope is in God. We cannot see, Scripture teaches us this, we cannot see yet what we will become. So I want you to think about this for a minute. We all have a notion about what a righteous man or righteous woman, depending on your person, looks like. Right? Now, most times that notion takes the shape of some other person. Might be your pastor, right? Oh, there's a righteous man. Might be the pastor's wife. Might be grandma or grandpa. My grandma, she could pray. She was a hardcore believer. But you know, your grandmother, your pastor, your pastor's wife, whoever you have in that, you know, they have the same insecurities that you do. Okay. So we are all in this same boat. And Paul, when he was speaking to us, trying to explain, we can't see yet what we will become. What is true righteousness? What is that level of perfection? Right? So, just a quick question. How many of us actually ever walked beside, in physical form, Jesus Christ?
Don't be looking at me.
We haven't. Right? What we have...
Not Jesus, just Moses.
Just Moses, yeah. Moses over Jesus.
Jesus is the Ancient of Days.
Well, I meant physical form.
Oh, okay.
Physical form. Okay. So we have not been privileged to see righteousness in human form to God's standard. That's what Jesus was. Righteousness in human form to God's standard. Okay? We haven't been privileged to see that. And so, Jesus gave us extra blessing. Did you know that? I know I'm on a rabbit trail. It's one of the hazards of the job. He gave us extra blessing. He told, I think it was Timothy, blessed are you because you've seen. Thomas. Blessed are you because you've seen, but blessed are those who will believe without seeing. There's extra blessing on us because we believed without seeing. So, but we all have this picture of righteousness. What Paul tried to tell us is what you picture in your mind as a righteous person ain't even close. But one day we're going to have that. Until then, that's our hope. That Jesus is going to make up the difference. Right? And when we lose that faith that Jesus is going to make up the difference because he just can't possibly love me anymore, now we're in that valley, okay? So, loss of hope, loss of love, loss of faith, these are the things that crush a spirit. So just looking at those two verses alone, there's a lot there to take in. But when we actually combine them with the verses that follow them, they take, I think, a little bit deeper meaning. There's a little bit more there to ponder, if you will. So let's back up. Let's read verse 13 again. Spouting off before listening to the facts is both shameful and foolish. And we'll skip 14 for now, and we'll go right to 15 through 18. So spouting off before listening to facts is both shameful and foolish. 15. Intelligent people are always ready to learn. Their ears are open for knowledge. Giving a gift can open doors. It gives access to important people. The first to speak in court sounds right until the cross-examination begins. Right? So the first argument, if that's the only argument you've got, that's why Scripture said the truth is established by how many?
2 or 3 witnesses.
2 or 3. I'm so glad that I studied in school so I could get that visual right. 2 or 3. Because it would look silly if I went the other way, right? By 2 or 3. We need more than one story to know the truth. Giving a gift opens doors. It accesses important people. The first to speak in court sounds right until the cross-examination begins. And then verse 18, flipping a coin can end arguments. It settles disputes between powerful opponents. Now, if you go into the King James and you look at that, it doesn't say flipping a coin. It says a casting of lots. And we've talked about that. We saw that a couple of chapters back about the casting of lots. That is was a very prominent way by common people back in the Old Testament days of determining what God's will was. Right? And so here they just said, well, casting a lot, that's like flipping a coin. Drawing straws. You ever drawn straws for something? Short straw gets their choice or has to do the dirty work or, whatever, right? So we see that. So now looking again, by itself, verse 15 seems to repeat the theme, watching what you say. Ignorance speaks, intelligence listens, right? But when you couple that with verse 13 and follow it with verse 16 and 17, you see that there's much more going on. So both 16 and 17, what they're really doing is encouraging us not to make snap decisions. Right? Remember, verse 15, right? Spouting off before listening to the facts. Don't make a quick decision. I learned this many years ago. I don't like to move fast.
Oh, we know.
That's right. My wife told me the other day, she said, this project that I've been waiting on? I said, yeah. She said, it's been about 2.5 years. You're about primed to go. I said, well, I've been thinking on it. I'm almost ready.
Just get it done.
That's right. Because I don't want to do it and then find out I've done it wrong. I want to wait. I want to see. I want to make sure. I want to do my research.
Who's going to tell you you got it done?
Everybody who comes and looks at
Oh
it.
my God.
Are you agreeing with me, brother?
I can't argue with your logic.
Okay, there you go.
Very much that way.
Brother John,
That's the base of concrete.
that's right. There you go. So we don't want to be influenced to a quick decision by flattery or gifts. There's another verse that talks about, a flatterer is just trying to get you to do something for them, right? And so, when somebody walks up and begins to flatter you, look, you know what, Hunter, you're about the smartest guy I know. I really need, Hunter's going to be, he's going to be looking around going, wait.
What do you want?
Thank you.
And Ivan's like, just sit down. He just wants something from you.
She's totally that way.
That's my point. Exactly.
Yep.
When they start to flatter you, they're trying to get you to quit thinking and make a quick decision. Right? If anybody in here ever bought a car? Anybody in here ever had a salesman tell you, look, if you don't get this car right now today, I cannot guarantee this deal will be on the table tomorrow. Yeah. And I'd be like, so let me tell you my first experience. So when I was growing up, getting ready to go get my first car, first car I was going to buy. Because my daddy bought me my first car, and he got one that blew up and told me, just don't get rear-ended, son. So there was a TV show on, and it had, the car was one of the stars. Okay?
Kid.
So, huh?
Kid.
No. That
General Lee?
Starsky and Hutch.
Yes.
we're talking about my generation, not yours.
Starsky and Hutch.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The striped tomato.
Yeah.
The 74 Grand Torino. Oh my gosh. That's the car I went looking for. And in 1977, you know that you could not find a two-door Grand Torino, let alone one that was red, let alone one that was tipped up on its nose and sounded like it had been dualed and bored with high lift overhead cams, right? So I did find one that was red. It was a Pontiac GTO, Ventura GTO. And it was tipped up a little bit, and it was red, didn't have the white stripe, but it had white seats, white bucket seats. Oh, man, I said, this is a good substitute. And yeah, I know it was a Pontiac, but still. So I took my dad with me. We went down, his used car. We went down, and the guy, my dad said, well, how much money you got? And I said, I got $2,000. Now, this was many, many years ago.
I wish we lost that money.
Many years ago. He said, okay. He said, I'll do the best.
It's all relative.
I'll do the best to get you home with some money. And so we went, we looked at the car, and I said, what do you think, Dad? And he said, well, I think what you've got is what this car's worth. And we went in to talk to the salesman. Well, the salesman wanted $2,500 or $2,800, I forget. It was way more than I had. And I thought, man, I could get $500 or more. This is the car of my dreams. My dad talked to him for a while. Nope, you're not paying that. And he's, no, I'm thinking, Dad, shut up. I'll come up with $500. This is my dream car. And my dad, to my horror, looked that salesman right in the eye. And he said, well, good luck. I hope you get it. And he turned around and said, let's go, boy. And out the door he went. And I'm like, you going to let $500 mess this deal up, Dad? Are you nuts? And I followed him, and I caught up to him. I said, but Dad, he said, shh. You see, we're not to the car yet. We got all the way to the car, got the key in the door, got the doors open. Here comes the salesman running. He said, we'll take that $2,000.
Because that was a hungry salesman.
And I learned, don't make snap decisions, right? Ignorance speaks, intelligence listens.
Do you know who the first used car salesman was?
Satan?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Who?
Satan. He was a used car salesman in the garden. He was a used car salesman in the wilderness when he was talking to Jesus. He used flattery to try to get them.
Flattery and gifts.
That's exactly right. To go the direction he wanted.
He wanted them to go. And how many of y'all have heard the expression using a soft sell? Using a soft sell is presenting a couple of options and then making one look really, really good, but not really giving any advice or strong pressure to make that choice, right? That way you think it was your idea. So,
Manipulation.
It's very subtle, but it's still manipulation.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't be influenced, and right? We should sit back and look at the whole picture. Look at everything. Salesmen, used car salesmen especially, you know what? When you walk up, they're not listening to a word you're saying. They're busy looking at you. Are you in love with that car? Because if you're in love with that car, I got you. You know what? I could give you the car for that price, but an extra $400. You gonna let $400? My son went with his older sister to buy a car, and he told because he's a lot like my dad, and the salesman, they were going back and forth, and my son said, "Nope, this is the price that she's willing to pay, right here." Used car salesmen call that quarterbacking. Somebody brings a quarterback with them, and they're calling the shots. So they won't talk to the person buying the car anymore. They'll talk to the quarterback. So my son was the quarterback. And he said, well, this is it. Because her husband had told him, this is all I'm willing to go, right? And he said, this is it. And the guy said, I can't believe you're going to let $500 stand between you and a great deal. And my son stood up, looked him right in the eye, and said, that's not what's going on here. You're letting $500 mess up your deal. And headed for the door. And they got the car. And I think it was more than $500. I think it was $1,000. But regardless, right? We need to look at the whole situation. Salesmen are looking you up and down, and they're listening to your tone, the kinds of things you're saying, and they're judging.
Coming out of your mouth.
They're judging everything, right? And they can tell, oh, this one's hungry. This one's hungry, right? Now, there's another example of this kind of wisdom in the Bible, and I was reminded of it. It's the story of Solomon. Y'all know the story of Solomon and the baby, right? Cutting the baby in half. Solomon dedicated the temple of God, and God came to him in a dream and said, Solomon, he said, your prayer at the altar today was incredible. I am so pleased with you. Give me, what do you want? God basically said, you make a wish. Whatever it is, I'll give it to you. Now that's a God thing right there. Whatever you want. Later on, God would tell him, he said, he said, if you'd asked me for women, I'd give them to you. I'd have been disappointed, but I made you a promise. If you'd asked me for horses, chariots, which in our day would be cars, if you'd asked me for houses, if you'd asked me to expand your kingdom, you know what Solomon did ask for, though?
No,
Wisdom.
Yeah.
Wisdom. He said, I don't know how to be king. This is too big a job for me. I need wisdom. God said, I'm so happy that you're smart enough to know what you don't know. So he gave him wisdom. And just a little bit later, 2 women showed up in court. Remember, when you're a king, right, you're the final court of appeals. You're the Supreme Court. You're the final judge on this earth. And so, y'all know the story, right? It was 2 prostitutes. And one woman said, that's my baby. She killed hers in the night, slept on him. And the other woman said, no, that's my baby. She slept on her baby and swapped them in the middle of the night. Liar, liar. And so they were going back and forth, right? And so, if you read that story, you see both women making their arguments. Solomon didn't take the first, and the first one that argued before him in Scripture was the true mother. But she made her argument, he didn't say a word. And then the other one said, she's a liar. That's my baby, right? She'd gotten up in the middle of the night, swapped babies, and taken the live one back to her bed, and left poor mama with the dead one. And he listened to the whole thing. Didn't say anything, but he listened to both sides, the whole argument. Now, I used to think that it was God's wisdom that caused Solomon to devise the test that he used to prove who the real mama was, right? Y'all know the thing, right? Is he bring me a sword, cut that baby in half, give half to one, half the other. Because that's exactly what David did when confronted with a he said situation. David said, split the land, you take half and you take half, because I don't know who's telling the truth. That's exactly what David did. Now, that seems fair, but we just read in Proverbs, right? It's just as bad to convict the innocent as it is to let the guilty go. Somebody's lying. David used human wisdom to try to figure that situation. But Solomon was different. Solomon brought that sword, right? He said, cut that baby in half. And of course, the real mother threw herself in front of the sword and said, no. If that's the only choice there is, let her have the baby. Solomon knew immediately, that's the mother. So I used to think, well, he did that so he would know, right?
Well, the other woman actually said, yeah, split him in half.
Yeah, split him in half.
Yeah.
That sounds fair to me,
Yep.
right? And I used to think, well, he really didn't know who the mother was. And after I read these verses, and I thought about this for a while, I've changed my position there a little bit. I think Solomon knew exactly who the mother was. He listened, and he was observant. And when they got through the arguments, he knew that was Mama. But he had to prove it. Because what happens if you know and you say, oh, that's the way it is? You're going to have half the room go, that's Solomon. He's not going to be a really good king. He didn't know. There's this other. He would have opened himself up to criticism. And as a young king, he had not firmly established his government yet, right? So he was going to have to prove, not to himself, because I think he knew. How did he know? If you read carefully, the scripture, right? What you find out is that Solomon was not just listening to the arguments that these two women presented, but he was listening to God. And I think, again, this is me, I think the Holy Spirit had been whispering to Solomon, telling him learning does not only come by listening to the spoken word, in other words, the words that are spoken, right? But by listening to tone, emotion, and the passion of the heart as well, right? And so as Solomon listened to these arguments, I think it became apparent to him because he was looking for and listening for more than just the words that were coming out of their mouths. And that the woman whose child it really was spoke with love and passion. That was her baby. And it came out, maybe not in the choice of words that she used, but I think it came out in the tone and the emotion of the argument. And you read what the other woman said, and it was just kind of like, she's a liar, and that's my kid. And we see that even when the sword was presented, it was the mother who reacted in love. The other one just said, okay, fine, whatever. Right? Because misery loves company. And so I think now that Solomon knew who the mother was, he just had to demonstrate that to everybody in the room. So that everybody who left that room that day left that room saying, Solomon is a wise king. He's going to be the man, right? And so he had to demonstrate that. He listened to everything that was presented, not just the words, but even the more subtle clues. And that's how he came to that decision. I think that's where the wisdom was that he was able to tell who the mother was and then figure out how to prove it to everybody else. But I think he knew. I think he knew ahead of time. Okay, so verse 18. Now, what do we do with verse 18, right? Flipping a coin can end arguments. It settles disputes between powerful opponents. Well, like we talked about before, that references a custom in the Old Testament. You know, verse 33, last chapter, we throw the dice. God determines the fall. You know how it all falls. It really doesn't fit in with any of the themes that we're talking about. The two themes that we're talking about. So, I think that it's added here as just kind of a break between two thoughts. I talked about listen. Don't be quick to speak. Be quicker to listen. And then we're going to get to this next thought about the crushed spirit. And he kind of popped that in there just as a break. That's a pretty heavy thought there. So take a minute, think about something pretty simple. Now let's get into the second half of that. It still says basically, God's the one who determines. There's no such thing as chance, right? God determines what all is going to happen. I'll put it this way: if you were gonna flip a coin to see who was going to do something, and you was very sneaky and you had a two-headed coin. You said, heads I win, tails you lose, right? And you flipped that coin. If God was not on your side, that coin would come down on its edge. Okay? God determines. Things don't just happen by chance. And that's kind of what that is. Now, so let's go back. Let's pick up verse 14 again. The human spirit can endure a sick body. Who can bear a crushed spirit? Verse 19. So we're skipping what we just talked about now, going right to 19. An offended friend is harder to win back than a fortified city. Arguments separate friends like a gate locked with bars. Wise words satisfy like a good meal. The right words bring satisfaction. The tongue can bring life or death. Those who love to talk will reap the consequences. So earlier, just a few minutes ago, when we were talking about that verse, we were talking about the loss of love, faith, and hope. And so the following verses, the ones we just read, they basically show that one of the tools that's used to lose faith, to lose hope, right? We talked about, well, if I can lose a family, a member, I can have some catastrophic event happen in life. But words from others, that's one of the ways they can damage love, faith, and hope. Words are not just empty things. They carry weight. They can damage or crush a spirit just the way a hammer crushes an egg. I just picture that. Poor little egg, you take a hammer. How many of y'all remember a comic named Gallagher?
Yeah.
Yeah? His specialty was smashing watermelons with a sledgehammer.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I never did get that. But he would melons, cantaloupe, watermelon, he'd just take a big hammer and whack, and then it'd go everywhere, right?
All over his audience.
All over the audience, yeah. So picture if you had an egg and you took a hammer and you crushed that egg, you gonna be able to put it back together?
No.
We've even got a nursery rhyme.
Humpty Dumpty.
Yeah, it's an old nursery rhyme. But right, we got a nursery rhyme. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. Right? And who? All the king's horses, all the king's men. They couldn't put Humpty back together again. Right? Crushing a spirit or damaging a spirit can take place with words over years. One of the thoughts that came to my head as I was going through this was our children. We need to be careful when my oldest girl was little. We had a knick-knack, paddywhack, gave a dog a bone. We had a knick-knack, a little glass doohickey that my grandmother had had. She had handed it down to my mother. My mother had given it to me, and I had it in the house. And my then 5 or 6 year old oldest daughter, had wanted to see it, wanted to play with it. I don't know what she was thinking. Anyway, she broke it. Broke it. And I was just irate, right? And I was just, don't you do me just something, you just broke this and this was. And I was in mid-rant on my little girl. And God began to speak to me, and he said, "Excuse me, sir," which I thought was very polite considering that I was in mid-rant. And he asked me a question. He said, "Just how important is that little doohickey? Because the words you are bringing down on your daughter right now will echo through her ears for decades and affect her children for decades more."
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, "Ooh, okay." And so I changed tactic, right? I said, "Doesn't matter, baby. Daddy loves you," right? And we're going to be done. When my son was little, he had done something, and it was pretty serious something. And I thought, well, I'm not going to get mad and yell at him, right? I've learned that lesson. And I'm not going to beat him or spank him, although I could have. But I thought, intelligent boy. So I got him and set him in front of me, and I said, son, I'm very disappointed in you. Oh my gosh, did he break down. He melted in front of me. He was a puddle. And I thought, oh my God, I've killed him. Right? And I had to bring him up. And it took me a lot of loving to get him back, you know. Now, I'm not saying that it wasn't deserved. But what I am saying is words have an effect on the spirit, on love, on faith, on hope. I mean, so tell your children, even if they're adults, tell your children they're doing well. You're doing fine. Right? Encourage them. Build them up. Do not tear them down. Choose encouraging words, not disparaging words. Even jesting or joking words can hurt deep or echo for years. And that's one thing that we just don't sometimes seem to get, right? It talks about a friend, right? What does it say? An offended friend is harder to win back than a fortified city. Arguments separate friends like a gate with locked bars. The reason is a friend estranged is a friend betrayed. Betrayal. Betrayal of trust. Betrayal of faith. Betrayal of love. These things are hard to get back. In fact, it's a little bit like that egg we were talking about a minute ago. Sometimes you can't get it back. Absent an act of God, it's very, very difficult to get it back. And it talks about a friend here, but the thought that was running through my head was who should be our best friend on this earth? I'm not talking about divine influence. Obviously, Jesus is that friend who sticks closer, brother. But who is, physically speaking, who is or should be our best friend?
My wife.
For him, his wife. For me, it'd be my wife. Right? Our spouse. Our spouse should be our best friend. If you cannot confide in your spouse, your most intimate thoughts, your fears, right? Then you've got a problem. Your spouse should be your friend. And here we're seeing, right? If you get crossways, if you betray a friend, betrayal of trust, it's not lying or cheating, right? That's not the real offense. It's the betrayal that is hard to overcome. And that's why it's so hard for a relationship or a marriage to come back after that kind of betrayal. Right? It just usually doesn't happen. Again, absent an act of God. And I've seen it go both ways. I've seen it go both ways. So that is, amazingly enough, that's the end of the lesson.
You got to be kidding me.